from the River Jordan to the Mediterranean Sea. From the river to the sea, it means the wiping from the face of the earth of the Jewish people. Is that something that you think you should be chanting?
Our young people are persuaded by the 2-second clips they see on TikTok or X or whatever it is, and they take that stuff as true because they don't have the background knowledge of understanding targeting Israel and how this stuff is accomplished.
Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of The Wall where we talk about things people don't want to talk about at cocktail parties. All right, good morning, my good friend Ron Chapman. You are looking dapper as always, as I look like I just crawled out of a dumpster.
Sean, thank you. I made it into the office. I just got back from a long trip with the kiddos in Washington. Big shout out to the Cascades. They played a major part in the trip with some beautiful hiking and climbing. So I have a little less of a voice, but I'm happy to be back, and that won't impact a conversation about, I think, one of the most important topics that has been going on, well, since October 7th, 2023, but certainly in recent history. And let me just get into this to lay a foundation for everybody of what's going on and why this is going to be such an important issue. So as many saw on the news and were quite shocked to see, on October 7th, 2023, 1,200 civilians were killed and over 200 were taken hostage when individuals from Gaza, likely Iran-backed, came into Israeli territory and started massacring civilians. We saw footage. We heard stories of families being slaughtered. We heard stories of young people at a festival consistently under fire. And today what we're going to do is dive deep into the world of campus activism that has been spurred as a result of Israel's actions. And some of the things that we found out, Sean and I, in the pre-show research may actually surprise you with respect to that campus activism and what caused it, specifically the groups behind that campus activism, and whether or not they are connected to terrorism organizations that have been labeled by the United States as terrorist organizations. I mean, Sean, picture this. Imagine you're a college student, or your son or daughter is going to college. You're passionate about social justice. You're an eager mind. You want to go out there and help those who are disenfranchised, and you're primed for that. And you're standing face to face with a college professor who may have strong backing from a terrorism-funded organization who is actively riling you up and teaching you in a way that would lead you to go forward and protest on behalf of a terrorist organization. I think some of our viewers are going to learn during this show, as a result of a lawsuit that was filed, a very brave lawsuit, that right after those October 7th attacks, immediately after, one terrorism group actually put out a press toolkit for use by people on American college campuses to tell them specifically the talking points that were to be used as a result of this uprising. What we're seeing is a coordinated information and violent attack against Israel and the West by terrorist groups. And here's the biggest problem, Sean. The Department of Justice isn't doing anything about it. The states largely aren't doing anything about it. But one brave lawyer, and well, several now, but from Greenberg Traurig, a very large law firm, has decided to do something about it. And this is the case we're watching, and this is the case that we're talking about. It's the National Jewish Advocacy Center versus several defendants who are connected, including one of the large groups, with terrorism. So that's what we've got up for everybody today.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I think about first and foremost, right, and I'm sure you do as well, I'm a parent, okay? I'm a grandparent. And I don't want my children or my grandchildren going to a place where tens of thousands of dollars are being paid in tuition for them to learn how to research, learn how to write, learn how to do advanced mathematics and predictive analytic modeling and things that will contribute to the betterment of society. Let's put aside anything else right now. I don't want them being indoctrinated into anti-American organizations that are terrorists. There's no other way to describe what has transpired at Columbia University what's going on at some of these other universities other than terrorist activity. And I'm going to be bold here. And I'm going to say that these individuals at these campuses, these woke, radical, far left progressive, they're not even Democrats. I wouldn't even call them Democrats. They are just far left, liberal, woke lunatics. They are disseminating manifestos. These are manifestos, and I would liken them to the manifesto of Adolf Hitler, Mein Kampf.
I don't think it's that far off. I mean, I usually attack that analogy immediately when it's used against somebody like Donald Trump or even somebody from the other side that has not been calling for the massive death of, not chanting river to the sea. But to your point, the left, the woke side, I have a bit of a different point to make and actually a story that occurred this week. And one of the reasons why I wanted to do this episode because of a lot of the misinformation. So first, one of the talking points that is used by these organizations is that you need to synthesize Hamas and Palestine or Palestinians. What you need to do if you're a terrorist organization to look legitimate is you need to look like you represent the people. And that means you need to look like you are Palestine. You represent Palestine. And so there was a friend of mine who I was chatting with. Somehow we got onto the topic of what was going on in Gaza. I think one of their friends had strong beliefs about it. And she asked what my thoughts were because she knows I'm relatively vocal in the media. And my response was the same response that I have. I firmly believe that anybody providing material support to terrorism is committing an offense against the United States. And if that is occurring in the United States, should be thrown in jail. And the question was, what do you think about the protesters? And I said, well, I have it on very good information that most of these protests are essentially created by organizations that do this. Well, her response was quite shocking. And she said, well, my grandfather's Palestinian. And she indicated that that she's got essentially roots in Palestine. And like that statement alone should have given me information as to her beliefs as to whether or not this is okay. And the conversation kind of ended there because I was like, I don't think I'm going to continue discussing this with somebody who feels that way. But here's the point, Sean. A lot of people think right now that Hamas is Palestine. A lot of people think that Hamas people are Palestinian people. A lot of people think that the Palestinians actually want Hamas to do this. And the reality is there's only one reason why Hamas has been able to claim that they are some sort of political party, and that is because of the massive overtaking of Gaza socially and financially during a time where unemployment was high, and this sort of Pablo Escobar donation of funds in order to gain political support. Where did most of those funds come from, Sean?
Iran.
$250 million from Iran directly to Hamas to be able to give it back to the people. Very charitable, very wonderful, right? And that is what gained political support. 50% unemployment in Gaza, 50%. That's under Palestinian rule, right? And then flush with cash so that the fighters can continue to be paid. Now, who were the people who were employed in Gaza during this time? The people who were willing to take up arms and fight. If you didn't take up arms and fight, you didn't get any Iranian money. You weren't employed. You weren't an employed military actor. All right. That is state sanctioned terrorism funded and fueled by Iran, a country with undisputed amounts of sanctions put on it by the United States. So let's clear up some of this misinformation during this episode. So as people are moving forward, even if they are Palestinian, even if they are Arab, even if they share the same belief or break bread with people who are affected by what happened in Gaza, that does not mean that they are terrorists. And it also doesn't mean that they should blindly support an entity like Hamas. They should listen to us and take in all of the information that's out there about these groups and what they stand for and make a decision for themselves.
I'm so glad you said what you said, which is, listen, basing your decision on what someone is going by their Palestinian roots or their Israeli roots or their Iranian roots or their Iraqi roots or Chinese roots, that's wrong. get to know the person, get to know what's in their heart. But I'll say this one last thing. You brought up from the river to the sea. And, I'm going to take a line from the presumptive nominee for the Democratic Party, our current Vice President, Kamala Harris.
Does she get the nominee title? Sorry to interrupt, but does she get the nominee title?
No.
I mean, can you be a nominee? Wouldn't we say she was anointed? Would that be a better way to say it?
Well,
anointee?
I'm glad you said.
I'm sorry.
I mean, it was a coup for all intents and purposes. And let me tell you something. Joe Biden has stabbed her in the back to the media the other day when he came out and he said, she can't run from this economy. She is tied to this economy as much as I am. Well, what happened to Bidenomics? What happened to all that? But I want to go back to something that...
What else do we know about this population, 18 through 24? They are stupid. That is why we put them in dormitories. And they have a resident assistant. They make really bad decisions.
The profound, brilliant Kamala Harris said, 20-something-year-olds, y'all are stupid. Now, that's not me saying this. She said it. Go find the news clip. And you know why I'm using her saying that 20-something-year-olds are stupid? Because these are the ones that are the majority of the people that are being brainwashed into these terrorist organizations while they're at these Ivy League universities. And unfortunately, some of the universities that are not Ivy League. But I guarantee you, if you go and you talk to one of these geniuses in the crowd chanting from the river to the sea, they can't tell you what river or what sea or what from the river to the sea means. So for all of you that don't know what it means, let me just educate you. From the river means from the River Jordan. To the sea means to the Mediterranean Sea. So from the river to the sea, it means the extinction, the wiping from the face of the earth of the Jewish people. Is that something that you really believe in your heart? Is that something that you think you should be chanting? Are we so dysfunctional as a society that we have allowed ourselves to regress back to 1938 to 1942 during Adolf Hitler, when he wanted the pure extermination of 6 million Jews, put them into concentration camps, used them as lab rats, put them in front of firing squads, raped women and young children, put them into burning ovens? I mean, is this really who we are? I don't think so. Yeah. I think there is a small segment of this population that is absolutely ridiculous. They're stupid. And it's interesting to me because people like Bill Maher, who is a lifelong Democrat, a lifelong liberal, has come out and said, these people are out of their effing minds. And I agree with him, and I'm passionate about it because I've spent time in places in Israel. And I have ties to the Jewish community. I am one half Jewish. And I will tell you, when I hear from the river to the sea, I'd like to take somebody to the river and then bring them across the land to the sea. And let's see if they truly understand what they're saying. Because I think if one half of these geniuses actually knew what they were chanting, I think they would feel nothing but shame. And that's what they should feel.
Like with anything, Sean, I think this requires education. You know,
sorry, I didn't mean to go off on a rant.
Well, no, it makes sense. But let's look at how lack of education causes a lot of this stuff. I mean, first of all, we've got these young, fertile minds. I don't necessarily blame those young, fertile minds for getting sucked into this. This is a very complicated propaganda strategy that has been created by some very intelligent people utilizing social media. You know, from the origins of the Muslim Brotherhood, they have been able to use misinformation for a very, very long time, very effectively. And they found our college campuses and the left to be a fertile petri dish for that. That's what they are. All right.
Absolutely.
It's just a really it's a really good petri dish for this information. So I don't necessarily see those people taking part in the protests as evil. I think they know not what they say. That's the issue right there. They have misinformation about what they're saying. So let's go back a little bit into the historical context of some of these groups. And I think we have to make the connection here in order for people to understand exactly what they're getting involved in. So we don't need to go back to like 1947. I think that's a little too far. If anybody wants to research why Israel took over Gaza and the West Bank, you can go and look at what military operation was spawned by multiple Arab countries that caused Israel to kind of buffer its borders a little bit. I'll leave you all to look at that. But let's go to 1987. That's really where I want to start here. 1987, Robert Downey Jr. is in full swing. I think River Phoenix, the good brother, is still alive. I tell my wife this all the time when a Joaquin Phoenix movie comes on. The wrong brother died. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Joaquin. But I'm a River Phoenix fan. I don't know, I'm probably going to get canceled for that. I don't know. Everybody loves Joaquin and the Joker. I'm not a fan.
Did you ever see the David Letterman interview with Joaquin Phoenix?
No, I don't watch anything Joaquin Phoenix. I turn it off.
Well, yeah, but I think you would love it given your stance towards Joaquin Phoenix. If you get a chance, watch the interview between Joaquin Phoenix and David Letterman. I think you'll love it. He's just like
it puts the lotion on its skin for me. Like I just see that every time.
Oh, Buffalo Bill. Wow.
Yeah. Every time I see Joaquin, it brings back nightmares for me. So 1987.
All right.
Yeah. 1987, the first intifada. Okay. There were a lot of attacks at that point against innocent civilians and Israeli soldiers. And that's really when the Gaza branch of the International Muslim Brotherhood splintered into two new groups. Okay. That's where there was a division. The Brotherhood started as a charitable organization. There's no doubt about that. And there was a leader of that charitable organization who was trying to keep it on the charitable track, right? And some people may dispute some of the actions that have occurred prior to 1987 as being potentially terrorist, but the information that I've got is that really started in 1987. So then there's some people who sort of were part of the Brotherhood and said, we've got to splinter off and create a new group because they're not using violence as a strategy enough. So then we've got the group Hamas, which it sort of means emphatic support for something. That's what its name means. So it rejects Israel and any notion of secular Arab or Palestinian rule. Okay. In turn, it advocates support and directly engages in terrorism through jihad. That's its focus. They put out a charter essentially saying that it will reject any Israeli state, and it calls for the eradication of the Israeli state. Openly, publicly calls for the eradication. Yep. And then the second thing is it will be done through violence. And that's when this phrase, from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, was developed. So it was designated back in 1997, 10 years after its founding, on October 8th, by the U.S. Department as a terrorist organization. Now, I'm going to just pop into the legal implications of that, Sean, so that some people can understand exactly what that means. When a group is designated as a terrorist organization, providing any support to that organization becomes a federal offense punishable by up to 20 years, right? Material support is the legal phrase there that we all need to look at. And that's what we would need to analyze when looking at the actions of anybody on a college campus. You have a free speech right. You absolutely do. But as John Roberts wrote in Holder versus Humanitarian Law Project back in 2010, you do not have a free speech right to provide material support to terrorism. Just like you don't have a free speech right to engage in a cocaine trafficking conspiracy. That's kind of not a free speech thing. That's a criminal thing. I have no issues with that as like a strict like freedom and individual liberties type person. That's what I spend my day job doing. So material support means providing any property, that could be money, tangible or intangible, or service, including currency or monetary instruments, financial services, lodging, training, expert advice or assistance, safe houses, false documentation or identification, communications equipment, facilities, weapons, lethal substances, and transportation to a terrorist organization. That's material support. It is all encompassing. There are some entities that are so darn violent when they've been declared a terrorist organization that providing any support whatsoever for them means that you are involved in that. So, hypothetically, if there was a terrorist organization that publicly declared themselves to be a terrorist organization, and somebody gave them money or somebody provided propaganda resources to that terrorist organization, to other people, it would then be considered a violation of federal law and would have to be prosecuted by anybody who raised their right hand and swore an oath to protect and serve the Constitution and uphold the laws of the United States, which I'm pretty sure Mr. Joseph R. Biden did at one point, although he doesn't remember.
Yeah, he doesn't remember that.
Doesn't remember that.
But Nancy Pelosi said he is Mount Rushmore-esque.
True. He is very much like a stone figure at this point.
I mean, I'm sorry. Listen, to compare Joe Biden to George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, I'm sorry. I mean, and then she had the audacity to say, well, Teddy Roosevelt is up there.
Sean, what she meant was great presence in a photo, but underwhelming when you get there.
There you go.
That's what she's referring to. So.
Listen, we have to find a way to save these young minds. But the problem is, it's not happening when they get to college. It's happening at a much younger age. It's happening with, for example, Mr. Walls, who came out of absolutely nowhere, who was a school teacher. His beliefs didn't just surface now. This guy has been to China 30 times. He honeymooned in China. What are his beliefs? I mean, we know that he abandoned his platoon before they were deployed. We know that he lied about his rank. We know that he never carried weapons of war into war because he never served in combat. But can we believe him when he says, I'm going to fight for the rights of everyone? Hasn't seemed that way so far when he took the side of violent protesters and riots that were going on that burned the city down for days before he called in the National Guard. Well, how does that tie into our what's going on in the colleges? Because it doesn't start at the college. It starts at a much younger age. And parents, you need to step up. You need to be involved, irrespective of whether you're a single mother raising children or a single father, or you're, parents jointly raising kids, but you're not married. You have got to be involved, and you have got to understand what the curriculum is and what these teachers are spewing to your children. Because when their minds are young, they're sponges. They absorb. They're like little parrots. They just start repeating and repeating and repeating. And then all of a sudden, they become this 20-year-old kid who's going into college, who has these thoughts, and they're confused because they don't know what's what. And now all of a sudden, they have an opportunity to become part of a vocal group that rallies and there's a cause. But they don't understand what the cause. It's exciting, but they don't know what the cause is, and they don't understand that when you're talking about Hamas, you are talking about a terrorist organization that is directly funded by Iran. And this is why in 2018, President Donald Trump withdrew the United States from the Iran nuclear deal. Listen, we all but bankrupted Iran. We took the money away from them. They didn't have the money to be able to support the Houthis in Yemen. They didn't have the money to support Hamas in the Gaza Strip. You got to remember, this agreement was reached with Iran back in 2015 during President Barack Obama's administration. And it was supposed to be designed to limit Iran's nuclear program in exchange for relief from economic sanctions. But the problem that we had is that they weren't allowing the international monitors to come in and to monitor what was going on. And then for the Biden administration to come in and undo everything that was done to protect this country. That's why it was done. It was done to protect this country, to protect Israel. Folks, Israel is our biggest ally in the Middle East. They have been. They always will be. They always need to be, because they are a strategic partner.
There's a lot there, Sean. There's a lot of passion there. I think that one of the things that a lot of young Americans were really inflamed by were these pictures of, babies that were dead in Gaza and human casualties, civilian casualties. I can tell you firsthand, some firsthand information here. So a while ago, when I was a Marine Corps judge advocate, an attorney for the Marine Corps, we went through a bunch of classes related to targeting in order to avoid an impact to the local population.
I'm so glad you're bringing this up, Ron. I'm so glad you're bringing this up. Thank you.
We'll get into tying a connection between these organizations because it's really, really important, but I want to digress into this targeting situation. So the process of targeting is we have a compound, maybe a headquarters for a terrorist organization. We need to make sure that we comply with the rules of engagement, right? And that includes a concept of proportionality. Proportionality is we can't drop a nuclear weapon on top of a terrorist household and kill 300,000 people. The justification for Nagasaki and Hiroshima is a little weak, in my opinion. We don't want to go back to those days, right? But that was different. That was Imperial Japan and a tough war to win. And maybe that was the thing that saved the United States. I'd rather be here than not, right? But when it comes down to it, targeting is a very complex process. What we will often do, and I can't get into any classified material here, but what we often do is select different types of weapon systems and different capabilities in order to specifically target a location and also monitor that location for a long time to make sure the presence of civilians is respected. Now, who is the 100% absolute authority on targeting in areas that are heavily populated by civilians? Israeli military. They teach targeting. They know targeting. They practice it every day. They engage in surgical strikes using surgical munitions against very difficult targets to understand. As a result of that, we have a bit of an arms race. Israeli learns targeting a lot better. They increase their capabilities, and Hamas increases its use of human shields and its use of civilian locations. In fact, one of the first instances of one of the leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood being arrested by the Israelis, he was arrested, and this was back in the 80s, he was arrested for caching weapons inside of a mosque, a massive weapons cache. Hiding weapons inside of a religious institution is a problem because obviously Israelis can't target a mosque.
Yep.
So why are we putting it there? That's where all of these weapons are located, and that's why it is very difficult for Israel to withstand attacks, but they do it very, very well. Not to mention, obviously, the reports of false casualties,
right,
inflated numbers,
yep,
and even video evidence of casualties standing up and walking after people think that the news camera has cut off, which I think maybe Ukraine probably did some things like that as well. It's common misinformation. But the problem is our young people are persuaded by the 2-second clips they see on, TikTok or X or whatever it is. And they take that stuff as true because they don't have the background knowledge of understanding targeting Israel and how this stuff is accomplished.
Thank you so much for bringing this up. So, look, we always think about collateral damage. We always think about proportionality. You have to. My heart goes out to any civilian who is injured, impacted, killed, loses family members as part of a war. But this is a war. People need to keep that in mind. Israel is a sovereign nation that was attacked by a terrorist organization funded by Iran. Israel has to make a determination of how are they going to target, where are they going to target. And please listen to this, folks. These terrorists, these are not good people. They're killing other Muslims. You just heard Ron at the beginning of the show talk about the fact that 50% of the Palestinians are employed. And the 50% that are employed are those who are picking up arms and fighting on behalf of Hamas. That means the other 50% are being used as human shields for these terrorists, these chicken shit terrorists who hide in hospitals, who hide in schools, who hide in mosques, who put other Muslims at risk. And let me tell you something. I know some good Muslim people. These are peaceful, God-fearing, loving people. They don't want this going on.
No, it's tragic. Let's get into this this lawsuit and the link as well, because I think this is the most important thing for people to understand. And strangely, this is not something that is being reported in the press, Sean, and it's quite troubling. In fact, I did some research on this. I found this lawsuit. I'm not the first one to have found it. There was a New York Times reporter back, I think, in May, who wrote a really good story about it. But I kind of had to drag it up out of nowhere because of some suspicions about the funding of these organizations. And I found this, but mainstream media is not publishing this. I sent out talking points to them a while ago and received absolutely no response, right? I have a credible connection between terrorist organizations and college protests, and nobody's touching it. Why? I think it's even too hot for them to handle. And so if it's too hot for them to handle, we've got to get into it.
I don't think it's too hot for them to handle. I just think they're pro-Palestinian. Even the liberal media. And I'm not anti-Palestinian. I am pro-humanity. All humanity.
Yeah.
When I say they're pro-Palestinian, they are not themselves understanding what the hell is going on over there. And if they are, they should be ashamed of themselves for being part of the propaganda push and the dissemination of a manifesto.
I have reason to believe that even this show, because of the words that we've said, it's probably going to somehow be shadow banned on some of the outlets. That's one of the reasons why we're going to start posting some of this stuff on X, because I'm pretty sure that X is not going to engage in the same kind of nonsense as some of the other unnamed platforms might do as a result of some of the antitrust litigation that we've already seen. So we want to get this heard, but let's talk about terrorism and how it works. So if you are a terrorist organization, you want to have connections to a political organization as well. Why? So that you can funnel money to the terrorist organization. And then you can also engage in both a violent faction of your extremism, but also a political one. The political one continues to push peaceful pressure onto the other side, while the violent one coerces them by engaging in terrorist attacks. We saw this with the IRA and Sinn Féin. The IRA was the faction that was going around, car bombing everybody. And then Sinn Féin was the political wing establishing some legitimate organization there. Well, they were doing the same thing with Hamas. So we've got the PLO, we've got Hamas, we've got other organizations. But eventually there was an election in Gaza where, primarily as a result of this flush Iranian $250 million and other donations, Hamas was elected. Now, what does Hamas do? They've got Gaza. They are elected. A large part of the Gaza government, the Palestinian government, is related to Hamas and connected to Hamas. Well, they also need to continue their attacks. So there's other radical groups inside of Hamas that are still considered Hamas that are engaging in the planning and the efforts for things like October 7th, right? And along with that, there is also a lot of funding being linked to some of these other groups. So let's just get into the specific groups. This Palestinian Committee was created. It's a network of pro-Hamas organizations that was designed to consistently derail any peace between Israel and the Arab populations. Israel was, I believe, going for peace many, many times. Here's some land, you all can live here, that sort of thing. And while there were some bad actors, I think that the negotiations were largely geared towards peace. Well, every time that would come close to happening, we would see some of these organizations flare up. So following the Oslo Accords and a peace deal that was actually struck, the Palestinian Liberation Organization in 1993 held a summit. At that summit, the Palestine Committee strategized how best to disrupt Israel's peace efforts. So peace is established in 1993, and there is a committee designed that meets in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, designed to disrupt Israel's peace efforts and provide political force to Hamas. Okay, who are the groups that met at that committee? The first is the Holy Land Foundation for Relief and Development, called HLF. The next one is the Islamic Association for Palestine, the IAP. Now, the IAP has many other alter egos, including the American Muslim Society, AMS. The HLF that I just mentioned earlier, the Holy Land Foundation, served as Hamas's fundraising arm in the United States. So Hamas sets up an organization in the United States. That organization obtains money. It sends it over to Hamas for use on those efforts. How do they obtain money? By getting people to think that something is wrong here, by getting people to believe that there's a humanitarian crisis, by getting them to open up their pocketbooks and donate money. Where is that money going? It's going to Hamas. What is Hamas? A United States sanctioned terrorist organization. All right. So these organizations incorporate as charitable organizations in the United States. Some of them didn't really have the proper paperwork to do this and to fund. A lot of them are outside of the law in terms of what they were supposed to do. Because of the tax consequences of what they're doing. But they're even more outside of the law when you realize that the money from these organizations is going directly to the terrorist organizations. Now, who are the organizations that are starting protests on college campuses across the United States? These very organizations that I'm talking about. Let's go back to 2001. The United States Office of Foreign Asset Control designated HLF, one of the groups I just talked about, the Holy Land Foundation, as a specially designated global terrorist group. In 2008, 5 of its leaders were convicted for providing material support to Hamas, convicted in the United States. Yep. 2008. Who was the president during the time that those prosecutions started? That would have been George Bush. Who was elected president right around the time that the prosecution was completed? Sure, that would have been Obama. I don't know if the convictions happened before or after, but Bush had them prosecuted.
That's right.
In December 2004, 2 of the groups, IAP and AMS, were found liable for providing support to terrorism. Who was the president at the time in 2004 when that was done? George Bush. This pattern of providing funds repeated itself over and over again. They created a charity called Kind Hearts. But then, at some point, because of these convictions, they did what these organizations do. They rebrand themselves. AMP and its alter egos rebranded their material support enterprise in order to start to look legitimate, because they realized that some bad things were going to happen if they didn't. So they took most of their people and their assets and converted them over to another group called IAP. The board members who were at HLF, that entity that was designated as a terrorist organization, are the same people at IAP. The assets are the same people. The locations where they practice are the same people. The same thing with AMP, another organization, sort of the same way. So AMP's core leadership and IMP's core leadership, exactly the same. So there's a lawsuit that was filed by a brave attorney from Greenberg Traurig, a massive firm. Sean, I can't recall, but do you remember how many lawyers they've got there?
Yeah, there's more than 2,750 lawyers in 47 locations all around the world.
this is not a small law firm. And the impact of this is that you've got a massive law firm. That board is having to sit down and make a decision as to whether or not we should file the suit. That lawsuit went into the hands of a whole bunch of heavyweight attorneys who wanted to make sure that this wasn't going to contain misinformation that would disrupt their ability to practice law first. You can be disciplined for filing false information in a lawsuit, but also they've got some pretty heavy organizations that are paying them retainers, and they don't want to disenfranchise them as well. So I'm not saying that, you can, because of that, guarantee that everything in this lawsuit is true, but this was not some solo attorney operating in a basement office, chucking paper at a court, or some individual plaintiff who filed the lawsuit on his own. This is one of the largest law firms in the world that was engaging in this. They filed a lawsuit, and we will post that lawsuit in the comment section or with the show notes. The important part of that lawsuit is that it walks through everything I just talked about all the way up to the college campus protests and shows that these groups were created and are factions of Hamas, Sean, and that's very, very important.
Yeah. I want to go back just for a second. You were talking about the prosecution of individuals from the Homeland Foundation. And I think people...
The Holy Land, yeah.
The Holy Land. I'm sorry, I said the Homeland. Holy Land Foundation, HLF. These prosecutions resulted in convictions of 5 leaders of HLF. And these individuals got lengthy prison terms. Their prison terms ranged anywhere from 15 years to 65 years. You got to be doing something pretty bad to be hit with 15 to 65-year prison terms. Would you not agree?
Absolutely. And pretty bad is, the kind of money laundering that would have to occur in order to get material support over to Hamas, which includes finances. And that's it. Like I read the statute earlier. You send money to terrorists, you are guilty, period. Like you just have to know that they're terrorists, right? And I don't know that you could really stand in a federal court and say, I'm not sure that Hamas is a terrorist organization. It'd be cute if you tried, but I think most federal judges, going to laugh at you.
Yeah. And I think you would agree that the HLF case remains, one of, if not the most significant terrorism financing trials in U.S. history, and, has had a significant impact on how the United States approaches charity organizations with potential ties to terrorist groups.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about in October of 2023, the Virginia Attorney General's office initiating the investigation into the American Muslims for Palestine?
Yep. So that organization is AMP. I think I might have referenced it earlier. And I'm sorry, everybody, for all the acronyms that we have to get into. But this is what happens when terrorists play a corporate shell game or a charitable shell game. There's a lot of acronyms. They all have very peaceful names. But most of them, as you can see here, are corrupt. So maybe there's, I guess if you have questions about the names, you can look at the lawsuit. But AMP founded an organization called AJP in 2008. AMP and AJP have identical leadership structures, just like the other two that I talked about. They share the same principal place of business in Falls Church, Virginia. AMP's website advertises that it's funded exclusively by domestic donations from individuals. AMP can only do that because the funds first pass through AJP, a US-based nonprofit. So here's what we have happening. Just to break it down one more time, we have a nonprofit accepting donations so that those can be tax deductible for the members. We have them funneling those donations for another entity that is essentially sending those donations to Hamas or using them for Hamas-funded aims. You are not allowed to play a charitable shell game. If the Red Cross, a charitable organization, decided to take donations in, but it then sent those donations to terrorist organizations, the leader of the Red Cross and anybody who sanctioned that decision would be behind bars for a very long time. So we've got the Attorney General who started an investigation there. My understanding is that's still ongoing. We don't have a lot of information related to that right now, but it certainly is something to watch. And again, it's something that hasn't been really addressed. So that group AMP sponsored the first, they call it SJP National Convention. SJP was more of the grassroots school on campus kind of organization. Some SJP chapters chose to remain unaffiliated on paper with AMP, this terrorist organization, or at least providing aid, but they still receive aid and materials from the larger NSJP organization. So there are some chapters on college campuses that don't say they affiliate with SJP, that AMP shell, but they still receive funds from them, particularly as it relates to this messaging. So NSJP's the on-campus entity, their official fiscal sponsor is Westchester's People's Action Committee Fund. We've got another one, Westpac, right? Westpac, what a wonderful name. That sounds like a military unit. As their fiscal sponsor, they receive and administer donations on behalf of groups such as NSJP. They keep a percentage of the donation, but they give the rest to the organizations. This is where it gets really, really interesting. So AMP's message to college campuses through NSJP is unambiguous. Violent attacks are a justified response to Zionism as an idea, to Israel as an entity, and to Zionists as a people. So you've got the Hamas charter that says we don't want a Israeli state, river to sea.
Through
you need to see that, right?
Through violence.
Yeah, exactly. Then we've got messaging from NSJP, an entity that provides funding up to Hamas, and they have the same goal and aim and structure, and they publicly say that. In fact, the lawsuit cites specifically to the publication that says that is their message. So the purpose of the messaging and the existence of the group is to justify the terrorism of Hamas and its affiliates within Gaza, and also to obtain money. Okay, so if you are listening to us and you have donated to NSJP, you have committed a federal crime. If you are an FBI agent and you know of somebody who has donated to NSJP, you raised your right hand and swore an oath that you would take down these terrorist organizations. Why has this not happened? Why did we see 1,000 arrests as a result of January 6th? People entering the Capitol in one of the largest federal investigations in history, but right under our noses, people are sending cash money to terrorists, and nothing has happened to them. Nothing even close to similar. That one case that you cited, Sean, was the largest material support to terrorism prosecution in the United States. Why? Because it was under George Bush, and he actually cared about preventing terrorism. Unlike what we have in our current administration, who only wants to prosecute the type of activity it doesn't agree with, and certainly let go the type of activity that might impact his ability to get votes. So what does this mean? You can fund terrorist organizations as long as the people in power feel too scared politically to do something about it. That's not the country I signed up to protect when I was in the military. And I'm sure that's not the country anybody wants to live in.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling to me that we will call moms and dads who go in to protest the teaching of inappropriate information to second, third, fourth, and fifth grade students, and they can be labeled by the current Department of Justice leadership as domestic terrorists, and they can be arrested, they can be prosecuted, they can be jailed. But when we have bona fide evidence, we have bona fide disclosures, it's right under our noses, to your point. People funding terrorists, global terrorist organizations that have penetrated the borders of our country and now have entered the minds of young children and young adults. we're sitting back idly because it's not politically expedient. It's not politically the cultural environment that we're living in for the moment. Listen, it's going to take, unfortunately, something drastic happening in this country, which I pray to God every night it doesn't happen. But it's going to take something drastic in this country happening for people to wake the hell up and realize that we are not safe.
Something drastic did happen, not in our country, but it happened in another country. It happened in Israel. It happened on October 7th, 2023. Let's get into the link between these groups and the response as a result of the attack. So we've kind of laid the case, and also the lawsuit has very credibly laid the case for the connection of these groups to terrorism. But the question on everybody's mind is, well, what does that have to do with, well, if you've been listening, the question would be, what does that have to do with the events post October 7th? So let's just get into that. Again, this is straight from the lawsuit here. And I want to make sure that the authors of this and the people that did the research get their due credit, because this took a tremendous amount of time, and we're going to continue to pay attention to it and do some updates to this episode. So I want to get to Hamas's charter. Yes, a terrorist organization has a charter, and it's specifically written down.
Isn't that lovely?
Yeah. What they essentially say, I'll skip forward. This should be done through the convening of solidarity conferences, the issuing of explanatory bulletins, favorable articles and booklets, enlightening the masses regarding the Palestinian issue, clarifying what confronts it and the conspiracies woven around it. They should mobilize the Islamic nations ideologically, educationally, and culturally so that these peoples would be equipped to perform their role in the decisive battle of liberation.
Jihad.
Battle. Just as they did when they vanquished the Crusaders and the Tartars and saved human civilization. So we started without really the object here, but as you get to the end of the paragraph, you can understand what it is. The object is the extermination of people in order to save the human civilization. So we've got the Hamas charter.
And before you go on, keep in mind that it's not just the extermination of the Jews. It's the extermination of Western civilization.
Exactly. Vanquish the Crusaders and the Tartars and save human civilization. So how do they do this? Well, their charter also gives us pretty specific information with respect to that. The way that they do it is to commit terrorist attacks. So that's why October 7th happened. We're starting to see peace stabilizing. Iran is not interested in peace. They need the region to be destabilized. And so they fund a certain faction of Hamas. That's really no secret, in order to go in there and start killing people, because they know this is going to happen. They know that Israel is going to respond. They know the response is going to be incredibly harsh. And they know that they are going to be able to fill their foreign coffers with donations as a result of that Israeli response. But the one thing that they need to do is they need to make this attack not necessarily look like it was core Hamas, and they need to make it look like Israel was improperly bullying an entity or a people that did nothing. So Hamas's strategy, I won't go into it too much, as a result of its charter, is to engage in all of this activity and support for itself using propaganda to achieve these aims. So October 7th happens. Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh, I don't know how to pronounce that, called for Hamas's resistance abroad. Join this battle any way they can, he said. Let us be partners in creating this global victory, inshallah, which means God willing. Normally a peaceful phrase, right? But let us be partners in creating this victory. What's the victory, Sean? River to the sea, right? 3 days later, the leader of Hamas's office and founder of IAP called on Hamas's global supporters to be a part of this battle. He sent the message out. IAP, AMP, NSJP, all of these organizations hear that call, and they know as a result of that, because they're listening, they're retweeting, right? That's what we have to do. So they answer the call. Within hours of the attack, the language of Hamas-authored disinformation campaigns appeared in NSJP propaganda across social media and college campuses, the identical information. Hamas sends it, they're pushing it forward.
This was so staged. This was so planned. This kind of transfer of information and dissemination of information and the pushing of this manifesto doesn't happen that quickly. They're not that coordinated. They're not that sophisticated. This took months, if not years, of planning. I mean, we have seen this slow but steady uprising of insanity at Ivy League schools and other campuses around the country. And it's not just California. It's not just New York. It's not just Boston. It's not just in liberal places. I mean, look what happened to one of the universities in Florida. I mean, you had problems there. Folks, wake up. Listen to the facts that we are giving. Put aside my passion, put aside Ron's passion, from a personal standpoint, and listen to the facts. Follow the trail of paper.
My passion is for the rule of law. It's for justice. It's for an equal system. It's not for any one individual group. But when I see people getting convicted of crimes where, just like we talked about in the first episode, based on weak DNA evidence, and they're spending a life in jail, but then you're allowed to be complicit in the attack and slaughter of 1,200 individuals and the capture of 200, it's tragic. So within hours of the attack, this information is spread through propaganda. It was already created and organized before the attack. People knew that this was going to happen. Exactly as AMP intended, NSJP acted as Hamas's loyal foot soldiers for Hamas's propaganda battle on university campuses. The next day, NSJP released its Day of Resistance toolkit. The next day. Sean, how many teams have you been on that were involved in releasing information publicly of a very, explosive nature? No pun. And how many of those organizations got their stuff together in time to get a full toolkit out in 24 hours? There needs to be at least 34 Zoom conferences before we can push anything out publicly these days, right? In 2023 too.
Heck, just for you and I to do an episode, I mean, there's multiple conversations. There's emails. There's, phone calls. There's conversations. I mean, that's why we only get one of these a week, right? Because, it takes planning. It takes research. It takes time to develop a cohesive argument, a compelling argument. I mean, listen, you don't become Ron Chapman just in a matter of hours. Okay? No, and I mean that sincerely, right?
Thank you, sir.
I mean, you didn't just, in a matter of hours, you weren't just a judge advocate. In a matter of hours, you weren't a Supreme Court attorney. In a matter of hours, you weren't a, federal prosecutor. In a matter of hours, you weren't a federal criminal defense attorney. It's the same thing. This, folks, it doesn't happen. These people are not that sophisticated to be able to take something like a toolkit, and put it out in hours.
It gets worse. It just gets worse.
My head hurts.
I hear what you're saying about it doesn't take hours, because I think that the way that is very, very impactful, or the reason that is very impactful here, is that you don't create the support and the distribution network in a matter of hours to be able to send out these talking points that are effective and inform a lot of other people. This is a social network that is created very carefully. So what's in the toolkit, Sean? Cue What's in the Box with Brad Pitt in the movie Seven. One of the craziest scenes ever. What's in the box? I'm very scared of what's in the toolkit. I'm that scared of what's in the toolkit.
We should all be scared of what's in there.
Show you in the box. Who's in the box? What's in the box? What's in the fucking box?
So the NSJP toolkit had some very specific information in it. And strangely, it's identical to the information that was put out by Hamas and the other organizations. It referred to the operation, and had a name, as Tufan al-Aqsa Flood. The resistance has taken Occupation soldiers hostage, fired thousands of rockets, the resistance meaning Hamas, taken over Israeli military vehicles, and gained control over illegal Israeli settlements. In the West Bank, the Palestinian resistance has called for the collective action by the Palestinian masses amidst attempts by the Zionist entity to lock up the West Bank. So they're trying to fuel actions in the West Bank as well. Today, we witnessed a historic win, this American group operating on college campuses said, after October 7th, the slaughter of 1,200 people. I added that in there. They didn't say that. Today, we witnessed a historic win for the Palestinian resistance across land, air, and sea. They failed to mention paraglider. Our people have broken down the artificial barriers of the Zionist entity. As the Palestinian student movement, we have an unshakable responsibility to join for the call of mass mobilization. Sean, this was released into emails, into messages. This was released on social media platforms with Mark Zuckerberg not preventing that information from being disseminated. This was released on Google platforms with Google doing nothing about prevent it from being disseminated. This was posted on flyers. This was chanted by people at rallies. And free speech is certainly a right. But remember, Justice John Roberts, in a 6-3 decision, very clearly said, you check your First Amendment right at the door. And this isn't a quote from him. I don't want to misquote him, but this is my interpretation. You check your First Amendment right at the door of the house of terrorism that you're about to enter into, right? That's exactly what happens when it comes to the First Amendment. There's no ambiguity in what the toolkit means. The resistance is the terrorist organization. The actions that they talk about are the slaughter of people, but it also is a direct response to Hamas's call for mass mobilization. They say that its members and allies in the toolkit not only support, but struggle alongside our people back home, and above all, normalize and support our fearless resistance. The German word for struggle is Kampf. Struggle doesn't always mean overcoming resistance or trying to overcome resistance. Oftentimes it means a fight, it means a battle, right? By those people who are disenfranchised. I have to go further, Sean, and I'm sorry to go too much into the toolkit here, but if people are supporting Hamas and this fight, you ought to read the toolkit and ask yourself if you agree with the platform of the party you've decided to support. Liberation is not an abstract concept. Liberating colonized land is a real process that requires confrontation by any means necessary. In essence, decolonization is a call to action. It calls upon us to engage in meaningful actions that go beyond symbolism and rhetoric. Go beyond symbolism and rhetoric. It'll be wild, right? That should have been put in there as well, right? That's the January 6th phrase that they think Donald Trump used to spark some sort of riot, and now he's being federally prosecuted for. Well, they don't just say, come join me, it'll be wild. They say, engage in meaningful actions that go beyond symbolism. Resistance comes in all forms. They don't just stop at that. They feel emboldened enough to go further and say it comes in all forms. Armed struggle, general strikes, and popular demonstrations. All of it is legitimate, and all of it is necessary. It gives me chills.
Yeah. And,
that's America.
And I go back to the very beginning when I likened their manifesto to Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf, because they use the word Kampf, which is struggle. This is the exact thing. This is dangerous. This is inciting violence. This is calling for war. This is calling for the eradication of anyone who doesn't share in the same religious and moral belief system that these radical terrorists possess. These aren't good people. These aren't peace-seeking people. These are people looking to decolonize, to destabilize, and to wipe people from the face of the earth by any means necessary. Let that sink in. But
those are their words.
That's their words. Here's the question that I have for you. And I am going to take this politically because I do struggle a lot with Donald Trump. I really do. I struggle with him immensely. A lot of his policies, I'm on board. His rhetoric, his language, things that he does away from policy, it drives me so mad that I have to turn the TV off.
Yeah.
But here's the question that I have.
Mm-hmm.
We know where Joe Biden is. Joe Biden is in the morning getting his morning prune juice so he could go potty. Remember, as he was walking to...
That's below the belt, Sean.
But it was below the belt, Ron, right? Because as he was walking to the plane and he was asked the question, he said, my butt was just wiped. So he
I didn't hear that.
You didn't see that one?
No.
You got to go, maybe if you want to add a little levity to this, add where Joe Biden is getting his butt wiped.
It's abuse, Sean. It's just abuse. It's elder abuse at this point.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, it's not you. No, not you.
Oh.
What they're doing is elder abuse.
It is abuse. Yeah. It is. But here's the thing. I don't think anyone can argue at this point. Kamala Harris, without invoking the 25th Amendment, is the president of the United States, or there's some group of people, possibly I use that loosely, Dr. Jill Biden and Hunter, who has been part of these conversations in the Oval Office being exposed to potentially classified or secure information. But we know Joe Biden is not running this country, okay? He's not. And that's the end of it. Where is Kamala Harris? She claims to be this tough on crime. These are crimes being committed against the United States. Where is Kamala Harris? For 3 weeks now, since becoming the Democrat nominee or the anointed one, she has not done one sit down on any network. And I read yesterday that her campaign came out and said they're being, tell me what this means, strategically ambiguous on her policies. Is that because she doesn't want the American people to know what her and Tampon Tim Walz policies actually are when it comes to defending, protecting, and supporting Israel and defending the democracy of our republic?
This is the concern here, and this is why Israel isn't getting the help that it needs in the United States and why American dollars are flowing to support Hamas rockets that are killing Israeli civilians, or at least attempting to kill them, because I know the Iron Dome has been incredibly strong, and thank God for what they have there. Kamala's in a predicament. Even if you were a qualified person to be in that office and you're a Democrat, you are in a predicament, and you've got to do the right thing. You have to sort of occasionally flex support for Israel so that you can keep the Jewish vote that you've wanted. You need to make it look like you want peace, but you've got all of these protests occurring, and you don't want to crack down on the protests. Now, what I would have chosen to do had I been in Kamala Harris's situation is I would have been clear with the American people, and I would have sat in front of a camera, maybe if I was Joe Biden and I was capable of doing so. Another reason why having an incompetent president can be dangerous. You sit down in front of them, like your President George Bush, like your Bill Clinton, like your Barack Obama, and you say, today I am launching prosecutions against any entity that supports Hamas, a terrorist organization. We do support the safety and security and freedom of Palestinian people, and we condemn human rights abuses against those people, but we do not condone material support to terrorism. These are two separate things, and anybody who attempts to confuse them is further committing crimes of propaganda against you in order to get you to fuel support for these organizations. Why can't our commander-in-chief, who obviously agrees with that statement, any reasonable person would agree with that statement, why can't our commander-in-chief do that? Well, because they're afraid that they're not going to be convincing enough to the people that are already protesting. The really important thing to talk about here is, we've kind of laid the case for their outcries after October 7th and requests for support, but I wouldn't really consider them materially supporting terrorism unless there was a connected campaign for further war and violence and further attacks. All right. So the toolkit also addresses that. We can just go back. I mean, it's so crazy. We don't usually see criminals publish publicly their information, but we've got this wonderful toolkit.
But who's going to prosecute them? Who's going to prosecute
Nobody.
them? Are you going to take them before the World Court and prosecute them at The Hague? I mean, come on.
This is why this didn't happen when Donald Trump was in office. This is why this didn't happen when George Bush was in office, or at least they tried and they were ultimately prosecuted. But now they know that they've got this problem here. You have a compromised office in the White House who can't take action on crime and can't comply with their oath. So is this part of a future connected campaign, Sean? This is the worst thing I've ever read. It's way worse than anybody would have expected, than anybody's talking about right now. So in this, and I was shocked when I read this, the revolution is being waged across historic Palestine, not just cross-factional, but unifying our people in the name of resistance. All Palestinian factions in Gaza appear to be participating under unified command. We are all acting in lockstep. This is the first time since 1949 that a large-scale battle has been fought within Palestine. Now, I have like J.R.R. Tolkien views here, right? We've got all the factions coming together, big armies, sort of like Lord of the Rings, converging on one specific location. For what purpose? For the largest scale battle that has happened since 1949. I didn't want to go back to 1949, and I won't. But if you go back and look at the losses that were suffered in 1949, you'll realize what their intent was. And their intent was complete eradication of Israel after reaching a British peace deal, immediately attacking, right? Resulting in Israelis trying to buffer themselves. So what does this mean being put in the toolkit? We are waging a large-scale war to eradicate Israel. We want your support in that large-scale war. We want you to protest and fund, and we want you to continue to perpetuate misinformation about human rights abuses in order to get that. We want you to support our terrorism campaign against a sovereign foreign nation with a system of laws that should have been respected and borders that should have been respected. Now, when Netanyahu hears these words and he decides to counterattack, when he hears that 1949 is upon him, fear in the hearts of every Israeli. He's not just going to stop at the border of Gaza and say, we're cool, stay on your side of the fence, I'll stay on my side of the fence, good neighbor. No. He knows that his very existence has been threatened, and in a region where he's surrounded by these actors, and in a region where now Iran is getting involved, actively involved. They used to do it through proxies. They're actively involved now. We have a situation where Netanyahu and his people know he is fighting for his existence, and they are fighting for their existence, and they are fighting for their culture. They will fight to the last man. They will eradicate Gaza, or Hamas in Gaza. They will eradicate Hamas in the West Bank, to the extent that Hezbollah wants to get involved and wants to do the same thing. I'm sure that they will go after that too.
Yeah, they will go right into Lebanon. There's no doubt about that. They'll go into Yemen. There's no doubt.
That's it. And how much support are they getting from the United States in this? They're getting lip service. They're getting politically connected words. They're not getting anything real. Mind you, the support that we've given Ukraine and its interests, despite some of the flaws with its leadership, should absolutely disgust everybody. Sean, we have terrorism on our soil. We have people funding terrorism on our soil. We have a government that isn't doing anything about it. Our rule of law in this country has eroded so far that political prosecutions are the norm. Actual prosecutions for real criminal action are becoming fewer and further between. And the actions of our government are more designed to protect those people that they love politically and not those disenfranchised people who need protection. I'll just tell you one story and then I'll shut up for a while because I've been talking for way too long. But this is one reason why I felt very strongly about it. I was relatively aloof to this. I slightly leaned Israel. I had some very impactful college professors, ironically, who really taught me about Israel and what was going on back in the 40s. And I felt for them, but I didn't think about it very much because it wasn't close to me. Well, I just had a trial not too long ago, and this was right after the October 7th attack, with a client of mine who's a very good man, who's Jewish. He's very Jewish, and he like goes to synagogue all the time. And he had a lot of support from the Jewish community with his case. I won't really talk about what happened in his case. It's not relevant, but his trial happened in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is University of Michigan territory. Very shortly after October 7th, there was somebody standing on the street corner as we were exiting the courthouse that had a sign related to Palestine. And this mild-mannered, gentle client of mine saw that sign, and it turned him bright red, not with anger, with embarrassment, with sadness, with the fact that this was happening on his own soil. And while he really attempted to restrain himself, he couldn't help but pointing out that the person that was holding that sign was actively supporting the slaughter of the innocent civilians and children. And I just saw a massive amount of sorrow on that man's face that he's leaving a federal courthouse engaged in the process of attempting to obtain justice. And he has to be confronted with somebody condoning mass murders on U.S. soil. That was just tragic. And that showed me that we have an imbalanced system and one that we need to do more to protect.
This I knew was going to be a lightning rod topic. I knew it was going to be something that struck at the core for me. While, I am a Christian man, I never forget, my paternal side of the roots.
Mm-hmm.
And I never forget the stories that I was told by grandparents that escaped Auschwitz and these concentration camps and what transpired there. I heard the actual stories. Remember, I'm 50 years old. I am old enough to have been raised by great grandparents who fled, who were tattooed on their arms with numbers, who were able to share stories of what it was. And as I said at the beginning, we have regressed as a nation decades if we are allowing this type of behavior, this type of hatred. Like Ron, he wants to see justice for all people. I want to see the ability to coexist for all people. But until Israel is given the green light to do what they need to do, and until we get a leader in the White House that is willing to stand up and support and do the right thing for our most critical ally, and I would say most critical ally in the world. We have significant problems, and now I am even more concerned with the relationship that is being built between Russia, Putin, and the Iranian regime.
Axis of evil.
It is an axis of evil. And again, this is happening. The relationship between Russia and China is growing, all because we have a failure of leadership. It is a failure. This is not a Republican or Democrat position that I'm taking. This is a position as a concerned American citizen telling you we have no leadership in the White House, and allowing Kamala Harris to become president is going to only exacerbate. If you think Putin and Xi Jinping and the Ayatollah in Iran and the mullahs in the Middle East and the terrorists from the Houthis and Hamas fear Kamala Harris and Tampon Tim, guess again, they're a joke. They will never be able to do what's necessary, and what we will wind up seeing happen God forbid, if these two idiots get elected and put into the White House, you will see war hawks like Hillary Clinton and others come out of the woodwork like cockroaches, and you will find us in the middle of a massive war that will never be won in the Middle East, and it will be World War III. That is what scares me to death.
October 6th, 2023, we were closer to peace than ever in the Middle East. October 7th changed everything. We talked a little bit about, and I'm going to connect this all the way to the rallies on college campuses and talk about a few specific ones, but I want to mention this in response to your comments, Sean. We saw Kamala Harris get anointed as a result of Biden effectively dropping out of the race. But my question for those out there is, what would Michael Bloomberg do if he was president in response to what's going on in Israel? What would Bernie Sanders do if he was president in response to what's going on in Israel? What would, I don't know, Gifford do? What would any other Democrat that doesn't come from this Clinton, Biden, now Harris cabal, what would they have done? Obama might have even done something about this, but this current cabal is not doing anything about it. Obama seemed to support Israel relatively well. I leave that up to people who are paying more attention. At that time, I was a college student, and then also, deployed in Afghanistan. My interests were over there, not necessarily looking at Israel, but certainly learning about fighting terrorism. So back to terrorism. Following October 7th, many of the SJP, that was one of the college campus groups, were violent affairs aimed at normalizing Hamas's rhetoric directly from the toolkit. So let's go to the first one. October 12th, very shortly after October 7th, there was a rally at the University of North Carolina, of all places. The advertising materials that were used for that came directly from the NSJP toolkit, including flyers showing images of paragliders. That's why I mentioned those earlier, the people that were involved in those attacks. SJP members brandished knives at Jewish students and instructed their members to wear masks in violation of the North Carolina anti-mask law. The coordinators, just as the NSJP toolkit instructed, sought to normalize Hamas terrorist activities and instigated violence. We have Jewish students afraid to go to their class on October 12th, right after they saw their people become brutally murdered in a terrorist attack. Could you imagine September, 15th, 2001, you have people who support the Taliban outside of your college campus, I was in college at the time, preventing you from going to class, screaming death to America, down with the towers. How would you feel about that? I just want to throw that question out there. Now, of course, the human rights staple, Harvard University, lot of Jewish professors and community leaders actively involved, Supreme Court justices who were professors at Harvard University. October 18th, 2023, members of the Harvard College Palestinians Solidarity Committee, a recognized NSJP affiliate, hosted an event in which they physically assaulted and harassed a Jewish student on campus. They're engaging in that resistance that was talked about in the toolkit. Cooper Union, October 25th, by any means. October 25th, 2023, Cooper Union SJP chapter hosted an event which included an angry mob that held innocent Jewish students hostage in the library. I remember I had a news hit canceled that day because of the breaking news where hostages were held in New York at a library. Jewish hostages were held. While Cooper Union chose not to press charges, the SJP affiliate did exactly what the toolkit said to do. Holding people hostages and not pressing charges. Kidnapping charges in most states would carry a potential life sentence. That's kidnapping. That's terrorism, and that's kidnapping. Brandeis University on October 6th, 2023. November 6th, 2023. They withdrew its recognition of its SJP chapter after, among other things, thank you, Brandeis, for trying to make the right call there, its members made explicit threats against a rabbi opposing the group's open support for Hamas in an email he sent to the Brandeis Jewish community. Law enforcement was so concerned that the rabbi was assigned personal security the day SJP scheduled a vigil for the martyrs of Gaza, a university getting private security for a rabbi there. I have to go further, Sean. I'm sorry, University of Chicago. I've highly respected the University of Chicago. I went to Loyola, not nearly as fashionable and cool as the University of Chicago, but we got to look at it from afar, and I feel okay with that too. November 9th, 2023, members of the University of Chicago United for Palestine chapter unlawfully took over a building and were arrested and charged with criminal trespass to real property. Just trespass. Trespass. That's it.
That's all.
We're a terrorist group. We're funding terrorism. We take over a building. It's trespass, guys. Let's look the other way. Class B misdemeanor under Illinois law. The charges were eventually dropped. We can't even make trespassing stick against terrorists, and the judge released them without a warning, explaining that they were allowed to have only peaceful, lawful protests. Keep it clean, guys. Now, we talked about this before, but I remember a case in Chicago where people protested and were unlawfully in a city park, and I remember that 9 of them were brought up on federal charges, and then it was displayed in a beautiful Sorkin movie that everybody should watch if you're interested in the justice system. They didn't get trespassing charges. One of the members of that protest was bound and gagged in a federal courtroom and subject to trial without his lawyer being present. He was black.
Yep.
That's terrible. Columbia University, you mentioned it earlier. Let's get to Columbia. It wasn't until November 10th that Columbia decided to do what it did. Columbia University suspended its chapter of SJP for, among other things, remember, November 10th. So other universities are suspending, people are being held hostages. Columbia's like, we're not going to take any action against SJP until November 10th. I'm happy that they did, at least. After threatening rhetoric and intimidation, but the chapter remains suspended currently, which is great, but is holding unsanctioned events, including co-hosting a panel with actual terrorists on behalf of SJP. Arizona State University. 4 days later, November 14th, police were called when SJP members threw rocks at the windows of an ongoing student government meeting at which Jewish students were speaking while chanting, "Intifada, Intifada, Intifada." Police had to escort Jewish students to safety. We have citizens of the United States. November 17th, 2023, right around the time that I was there with my client at the University of Michigan while in Ann Arbor, SJP members at the University of Michigan broke into an administrative building and injured 2 police officers. 40 people were arrested. I do not have information as of the results of those cases, but we could look that up and
well, I'm sure Rashida Tlaib is going to be actively involved in the the dismissal of all of these fine people.
Sure. I mean, the prosecutor up there in Ann Arbor, if it's state charges, which it likely is probably not going to want to risk the votes in the next election in order to go ahead and prosecute what is right, which is another problem with political connections here. Same thing, Temple University, SJP chapter in a mob-like fashion descended upon Goldie's, a falafel restaurant owned by an Israeli Jew, screaming, "Goldie, Goldie, you can't hide. We charge you with genocide." The mob vandalized the windows, Kristallnacht style. The U.S. Department of Education has since opened an investigation. Just the U.S. Department of Education. That's who we have enforcing our terrorism laws in the United States. Rutgers turned. I have to keep going because it gets even more disgusting. Rutgers, December 12th, 2023. Thankfully, they suspended its chapter on December 12th for unlawful behaviors, including vandalism, noting that the administration had a reasonable basis to conclude that continued activities by the student organization pose a substantial and immediate threat to the safety and well-being of others. Now, we've talked about a few smaller universities who've suspended their SJP chapters. Yep. SJP is in a lot of universities, and you didn't hear that they've all suspended it after these sorts of things have been happening. But you have heard of national suspension of fraternities happening on the regular when they violate laws. University of California at Berkeley, February 26, 2024. Bears for Palestine stormed an event where an IDF reservist was scheduled to deliver remarks a lecture on an international law, just a lecture on international law. Prior to the event, Bears for Palestine again posted on its social media that it would shut the event down. When the location was changed in response to the protest, they blasted the location change on social media, directing protesters to the new location. The members blocked the venue, smashed the windows, and physically attacked several Jewish students in attendance. One student reported being choked by rioters. Emory University descended on a house with Palestinian flags. In response, one student holding an Israeli flag was punched in the stomach and spit on by a protester while his flag was taken from him. California State. There are more examples, Sean. Each one terrible, each one an affront to Jewish people peacefully attempting to receive an education at one of our institutions that are largely public funded by the Department of Education and student loans. And almost no action is being taken against these groups criminally. And even when very serious crimes have been committed, such as hostage taking, such as the destruction of property, such as chanting or disseminating terrorist propaganda within the United States, we don't see any action taken by our good friend Merrick Garland. We don't see any action taken by Joseph R. Biden. We don't see any action taken by the local prosecutors, the people all who have sworn to uphold and protect the law. And who are the victims of this? We don't even have to get into Israel to see victims here. Everybody who wants to exercise their free speech right, everybody who wants to peacefully protest and engage in the democratic process is terrorized by the actions of these people. Quell the speech of your opponents. Engage in propaganda. Funnel that money to violent terrorist organizations. That's the play here. And there's so many people out there, like my friend in that text message conversation, who think that the things that we are saying are just anti-Palestine. No, it's anti-terrorism that we're concerned about.
Man, I'll tell you what, this was an incredible, emotional, and liberating discussion on so many fronts. Obviously I am not the legal mind. You are. And, I have my thoughts, I have, my political beliefs and my views, and I try to put out as much of a centrist view, which is what I am. But there are times that for me, I can't sit by idly and watch terrorists overtake this country that so many like yourself and others have bled and sacrificed so much, in the families that made the ultimate sacrifice for the loss of a loved one who heroically went into battle and served their country for the greater good. It's hard for me to swallow that pill, and I can't do it. And I know I've said it to you a bunch, and I'll say it to you all the time. On behalf of this country, on behalf of the proud American citizens and the patriots of this country, we all salute you. We all thank you for your service, because without people like you, who knows what this country would be.
Thank you, Sean. And, I'd extend the same to you, because this is the ultimate form of patriotism, right? Not being afraid, getting a voice out there and actually discussing the real issues and providing real information to people, and not sitting down and being quiet when our speech is attempted to be suppressed. But what's the most patriotic is not supporting any political party. It's not supporting any one individual. It's allowing the peaceful dialogue to occur in a forum like this, instead of on the battlefield, right? Instead of an unfair fight against civilians, we should be able to talk peacefully and get information and make our decisions. And most importantly, have the ability to vote for the people that we feel will reflect our core values and beliefs. That's patriotism. That's what I stand for. And that is absolutely what you stand for. And so I do appreciate your service in that regard, Sean.
All right, my friend. And to all of you that stuck around and spent time watching this episode or listening to this episode, Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. On behalf of Ron, myself, and the entire team at Legacy Media, we hope you enjoyed the program. Make sure to like, subscribe, leave a review, and don't forget to follow us on social media to stay updated. So until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and keep the conversation going. See y'all soon on the wall.